Okay, we've come to our first trail information. Take the left to the fort, which I'm about to do, and then I'll come back and I'll take the trail to the tavern. It's Washington's Tavern. It's named after George Washington, but it was built after his death. I believe it was built in 1825, and George Washington died in 1799. So that is the way I'll be walking. But I just also wanted to show this cool little stone bridge. It's grassed over, but a lot of good construction. It's lasted several hundred years. All right. I'll get back with you when we get to the next interesting scenic spot. Okay, I just wanted to do a quick stop just to let you know that the road is paved, and I believe it's paved most of the way up to the fort. We'll find out when I get up there. But so, you know, anybody that's handicapped and things like that, it's very easy to get to, and that's kind of back towards where I was just at. So let's move on, and I'll come back when I get to the next spot. Okay, here we are where they're showing a reenactment in a pictorial of them building Fort Necessity. It says, here in a rare meadow among the frontier forests, the soldiers built a small stockade in May of 1754 with Lieutenant Colonel George Washington and 40 Virginia militia after skirmishing with a small French detachment. So he built this Fort of Necessity, is what it was called, to defend his 130-man regiment. He selected the fort site in the field ahead. His soldiers split oak logs in half, then set them upright in a large circle about 53 feet across. It says they built a 14-foot square log storehouse outside. They began digging trenches in the boggy ground, and they finished building it in the fort in 5 days. And by mid-June, Washington received reinforcements, increasing the British force to almost 400, with promises that more British troops were on the way. And there is the fort we'll be walking to. We'll get back with you.
Good afternoon, my name is Ranger Braxton Berkey. This is Fort Necessity National Battlefield. The reconstruction of the fort is over in that direction, there we go. But we do preserve and commemorate the opening battle of the French and Indian War. This is George Washington's first battle, fought on July 3rd, 1754. It's his first military command. He's 22 years old, he's colonel of a military force that's not only a group of soldiers, but a group of road builders as well. So George Washington is sent here by the colony of Virginia and the British government to open a military road for more soldiers and later settlers to come through. Virginia has designs on settling this western land. Of course, they feel that this belongs to them by right of charter. This whole land, modern day western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, the lands that are in the Ohio River basin. And so the forks of the Ohio, modern day Pittsburgh, is key to this whole region because it's the meeting place of 3 navigable rivers. And so the British and the French, who are also contesting for control of this land, they both want to fortify what is now Pittsburgh so they can control the river traffic and dictate what goes on out here. And so George Washington's job is to build that military road, but as he's progressing his way through these western lands, he arrives here at the Great Meadow in May of 1754. And so this starts off as a campsite. This is a pit stop on his march to the Monongahela River. And he establishes a camp here, not only for his men, but also it offers grazing for his horses and his cattle. So in many ways, it's like a 18th century gas station, for a place for his men to rest and a place for his animals to refuel. But it's here in 1754 that he does fight his first battle. The French, of course, contest him being here, and they're going to send out forces first to intercept him and tell him to leave. And that results in the battle 7 miles from here at Jumonville Glen on the morning of May 28, 1754. The first battle that Washington actually experiences after he defeats the French force up on Chestnut Ridge. He will later write that he had heard the bullets whistle and there was something charming in the sound. And so that skirmish results in the death of a French officer, Ensign Jumonville. And when word gets out that that officer's been killed, because one French soldier gets away, when he finally gets back to Fort Duquesne, the French learn of Jumonville's death. They are not happy. They are not happy that a French officer has been killed on French land. Particularly upset is a man who has just arrived at Fort Duquesne with reinforcements from the north. His name is Captain Louis Coulon de Villiers, the older brother of Ensign Jumonville, and so he will lead the French force that attacks Washington here on July 3rd. Washington soldiers are actually trying to retreat from the French. At that point, Washington's native scouts alert him to this French force bearing down on him. But Washington's retreat breaks down here in the meadow on July 1st. And by July 3rd, the French force that's come down from the Monongahela River and marched overland arrives here, and there is a 8-hour siege where the British forces are in the fort for the most part, and the French are going to take to these tree lines. The French also have several hundred native warriors with them and French-Canadian militia, along with French regular troops, so it's a coalition force really on both sides. The French have their partners in the Native Americans. Washington actually has 100 British regular troops that arrived in June to reinforce him here, and so for 8 hours there is fighting. The weather that day is not particularly good, and that creates problems for the weapons that these soldiers use. The flintlock musket, and so flintlock ignition, black powder is the propellant, and so water interferes with the operation of these weapons. The French are under the cover of the trees, so they remain dry for a brief period. But by 8 o'clock, both sides are wet. The fort is in a natural meadowland with saturated ground, so the rainwaters fill up the trenches that the British soldiers have dug. Boxes, barrels, and dead men are floating around. Many of the surviving Virginia troops who have not been killed or wounded break into the storehouse you see down there, which contains rum, among other things. And so that rum intoxicates the soldiers. So Washington has a lot of issues he's dealing with: heavy casualties, intoxicated soldiers, still many men sick, wounded. On the French side, they're tired as well, and that cooperating force of Native Americans is becoming restless because they haven't achieved a quick victory. They have no plunder or captives they can take back to their villages, and so these Native Americans with the French are coming from a great distance, and so they're threatening to leave the French in the morning. So the French commander, Captain de Villiers, decides he's going to call out for an end to the fighting, and he will draw up terms of surrender for the British in his native French. 2 British officers will come into the French camp. They'll return to the fort, and it'll be up to one of those officers, Captain von Braun, to translate the document. Von Braun is a Dutchman, translates the French into English for Washington, the British commander, Captain Mackay, who do not understand French. And so through that translation, Washington learns he'll receive the honors of war, which is a generous surrender. He signs the next day, July 4th, 1754. The British, after a formal ceremony, retire back to Virginia. The French come in, dismantle, destroy the fort, and they head back to Fort Duquesne. And so the big fallout from this battle is that surrender document. It grants the British an honorable surrender, but contained in one of the articles of the document is also a description of what had happened at Jumonville Glen. According to de Villiers, the death of his brother, Ensign Jumonville, was not a happenstance death in the course of fighting. This was a cold-blooded, pre-calculated, politically motivated murder and assassination of a French officer on French land, when Britain and France are still technically at peace. And so by signing that document, Washington is confessing to being an assassin, a trespasser, and so this is a propaganda victory for the French, but it actually is not. It's the start of a war, but the official war is only declared 2 years later in 1756, and then that fighting will rage through 7 years, called the 7 Years' War. In many respects, it's the First World War, and that war ends in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. But the British, though they win this war, the costs of fighting the war, particularly in money, are so great that they have to impose taxes on their subjects, particularly their colonists. And you've heard the phrase taxation without representation. That leads to revolution. 22 years after George Washington surrendered here for the first and only time in his military career in Philadelphia, a number of American patriots are signing their name to the Declaration of Independence. A copy of the Declaration will make its way to King George III, who is now the British king, the ruler of Great Britain. He is going to insist on fighting to maintain his empire. He's not going to let the 13 British colonies just break away. And so George Washington will lead the American army in the fight for independence against King George III. George Washington, of course, wins the war because we have the United States of America, we know this, but he does it with French help. So the French are upset at losing this 7 Years' War, the war that Washington kind of starts down there in the meadow in 1754. So the ruling French monarch, King Louis XVI, will avenge France's defeat in the 7 Years' War by helping Washington beat the British, contributing much, including weapons, money, and other supplies, and eventually his army and his navy.
So, a little bit of trivia. What happened on this not you. Yeah. State the Declaration of Independence first publicly read in Philadelphia. State House. Now you may. You're about.
All right. Well, I am self-willed and ungovernable because I am a member of the Virginia Regiment. So, good afternoon. Welcome again to Fort Necessity National Battlefield. My name is Braxton. This is Brian. We portray members of the Virginia Regiment of 1754. The Virginia Regiment is Virginia's first professional military force recruited by the colony in response to what's going on in its western lands, what the French are doing out here, building forts, as Virginia sees it, illegally on Virginia territory. So if you have your park brochures on hand, you look on that back on that map, you see where it says like Fort Presque Isle, Le Boeuf, Show. Those are all French forts on Virginia ground. And so what is called the Fort City, Ohio in 1754, that's key to this whole region. The colony of Virginia is very interested in getting a fort built there. They want to set up soldiers at that point to control river traffic where the Allegheny, Monongahela, and Ohio rivers meet. Today we call that the city of Pittsburgh. And so the British can fortify that point. Not only do they control river traffic, but those soldiers provide protection for settlers. So the Virginia colony wants to settle these western lands, lands that they feel belong to them. In order to get Virginia settlers to what is now Pittsburgh, point A to point B, what do you need? Roadway, right? A way to get from point A to point B. And so the Virginia Regiment is not only the first military force of Virginia, we also jokingly call it the first Virginia Department of Transportation Road Crew, VDOT. And so these soldiers and laborers, 296 of them will be recruited in 5 companies. The officers of the Virginia Regiment, men like Colonel George Washington, I'm sure you've heard of him, right? Has anyone not heard of George Washington? Okay. Men like Adam Stephen, who's major of the Virginia Regiment, and others. They're coming out here for a range of motivations, personal, professional. We think about the officers. They are well-to-do men, generally. They're well-connected. That's how they secure their rank through the government, who commissions them. And so they provide for themselves, but they're out here for pay, for prestige. After all, if you come out here and you achieve military glory, it elevates you back in your community, in the eyes of your neighbors, and that helps you out in another line of work.
Politics.
Yeah. And so you think of George Washington. What does he do after he's a soldier? Well, yeah, after the Revolutionary War, he's President of the United States. So he's a statesman in addition to being a soldier and a gentleman farmer. And so military success helps you politically, not just Washington, but also you got Ulysses S. Grant, Dwight Eisenhower, and others. And so that's a powerful motivation for men who are well off to come out here and risk their lives. But if you are one of those well-off gentlemen, or even if you are of a lower rank but you have a business, a farm, a family, would you leave that to come out here into the Ohio country as an enlisted soldier, do hard work, get bossed around, and die a horrible death either at the hands of a native warrior, a French soldier, or the most common killer of 18th century armies?
Disease.
Yeah, disease, dysentery, right? So those are all possibilities. Would you leave the comforts of home to experience that? No, probably not, right? And so for the officers to fill up the regiment, they have to recruit from among the loose and idle men of Virginia. Loose and idle means they don't have steady occupations. Also, Washington says they're destitute of house or home. That's what he writes to Governor Dinwiddie. And so these soldiers who are without jobs, steady occupation, without homes, they're going to sign up with the prospect of getting a steady paycheck. They're going to sign up with the prospect of getting 3 square meals a day, I guess you could say, a military ration, a pound of meat, and a pound of bread. Now that meat would come in the form of beef or pork that's been salted, and your bread would be a pound of loose flour. Now why would you get flour and salted meat?
It travels and it doesn't rot.
Yeah, it travels and it lasts. It's preserved foods. And so their supply, the principal supply of food is their supply line coming from Virginia. And so the flour, which isn't always here when it needs to be, Adam Stephen would later write that many of his men had gone several days without their proper amount of bread ration. But that supply line that's long and tenuous, if you're shipping food or supplies, it has to last, right? So that's what militaries are issuing their soldiers in the 18th century. Dried salted foods. And then you see I have a canteen on the side of my wear. In that canteen would be water drawn from a natural source, like a spring or a stream. Now today in the Great Meadows that field below us, or these fields below us, you have two options. You have Great Meadow Run or Indian Run. And which would you drink from?
Probably Indian rum.
Why?
Indians drink from it.
Okay, so yeah, so all right, so yeah, so of course most of you basically said you'd rather have Gatorade, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the Florida drink, I guess. But yeah, so so today you want to go to our visitor center and either buy water or get water from the fountain because it's good. It's sanitary. It's good to drink. This is filled with bacteria. Natural wildlife lives in those creeks, and so soldiers who are drinking from a creek, well, they could get sick, right? You mentioned dysentery, and so the Virginia government does provide these soldiers with rum. And so they're issued small dosages of rum every day to flavor water, make it better to drink. However, if loose and idle men with guns get uncontrolled access to their weapons and rum, what could possibly happen? Yeah, you remember what happened a few days ago over in Russia? You could have a repeat of that. Then become mutinous if you do that. So that's why Washington actually builds that storehouse and stockaded wall you see down there. The reconstruction on the historical footprint of the original is down there. Its primary job is actually to protect those supplies from the elements, from rain, with the gunpowder especially, from the enemy, and from Washington's own men. So the soldiers of the Virginia Regiment, you saw them walk up here. How would you know they're soldiers? Most soldiers have what to show they're a soldier? A uniform, right? The word uniform means everybody looks the same, right? More or less the same uniform. Well, the Virginia Regiment, Virginia, a colony of Great Britain, the color of their coat would be, of course, red coats, right? Now, you notice neither Brian and I have a red coat. I have a red waistcoat on, but this is not proper wool regimental coat, just a civilian waistcoat. And so the material purchased by Virginia, not very good. It's described as being a sleazy red cloth. And those coats that were made, many of them, were still in Alexandria, Virginia on June 28, 1754, because the quartermaster is actually alerting Washington to the fact that they're in Alexandria, Virginia. Did they make it up here in time for the battle on July 3rd? Probably not. And so the Virginia soldier here, wearing what clothes he brought from home, loose and idle men, remember, or wearing what little the Virginia government could provide, little to no bathing, doing weeks of road work out here in the wilderness. What did they look like on July 3rd? Right, they certainly weren't uniformed like the British regulars you see on the front of your information there, Captain McKay's independent company troops. They also probably didn't smell very good, right? So they're not very soldierly in appearance. So with all that in mind, poor pay, poor food, little to no clothing, hard work, death, disease. Would any of you volunteer for this? Well, yeah, several hundred men did, though. And so why? What could the Virginia government offer a loose and idle man destitute of house or home? If he wants a house, what does he first need?
60 acres.
Yeah, he needs land, right? In theory, the government of Virginia has lots of land. So Governor Dinwiddie of Virginia will issue land bounties to new recruits. So yeah, 60 acres of land apiece for their service. And so 60 acres isn't a lot in the grand scheme of things, but 60 acres does provide an opportunity to establish a farm, to grow food, to feed yourself, to have a family. Also, holding that property makes you a full citizen in 18th century Virginia. So being a property owner, being 21, male, all these things are required in order to vote and hold political office. And so for these men, it's not only a road for Virginia, it's a road to their new life out here in the Ohio country, if they get that land. Though unfortunately many of these men did not. And so land bounties offered by the Virginia government, the French win the battle. Do they honor Virginia land claims? No. The British win the war, but the government's still not all that great about honoring their end of the bargain. For many of these men, they're content to receive money from men like George Washington in exchange for their land claims. So Washington will buy up a lot of shares of land and accumulate a lot of land in western Pennsylvania, but most of these men will never see that new home in the Ohio country. So we talk about the soldiers, what they wear, what they eat. So on July 3rd, what's the most important piece of equipment they can have? What I think you all came here to see. Musket. Okay, so I'm going to let Brian talk to you about the musket.
Okay, good afternoon. So, soldiers would have been issued a variety of equipment. Each soldier would be given a sword. No, you're not listening. So, the soldiers would often replace what would have been a sword with a small axe or hatchet. But contrary to what you see on TV in Hollywood, it's not thrown around. Why would I take a perfectly good tool and throw it away? And if some of you doubt me, go home, pull out some of Dad's good tools and start throwing them around the backyard. You'll become apprenticed to tanning real quick. Yeah. So, next to it, we do have a tool that works very well today. Yep, the bayonet. Any volunteers from how it gets used? Of course not. Just like the ancestors of 250 years ago. I mean, most of you probably cry when you go to the doctor, you get a little needle in the arm, right? Imagine something a lot thicker being jammed into your body. So it's a weapon more of intimidation. Rarely would armies clash with bayonets. One side or the other would give way and say, yeah, you can have the field. But in camp, that's a nice tool. It's good for digging, it's good for cooking, or simply placed in the ground, a candle holder. Actually saw more service melting wax than it ever did opening anyone's belly. But as Braxton alluded to, the main tool that a soldier would have carried would have been the musket. We're both carrying smoothbore, British-style muskets. French muskets, Prussian, Dutch muskets, they're all basically the same. They come in three basic parts: lock, stock, and barrel. Right. They're smoothbore. They're not rifled. So there's no grooves cut into the barrel that impart a spin on a ball to give it stability and accuracy. This is like a shotgun barrel, just nice and smooth. And the reason why that was preferred is because in combat, you want to be fast or slow. Fast, yes. Because if you're slow, you'll become really slow. They call that dead. So the idea was to throw as much junk towards the enemy as possible. Now rifles do give you the accuracy, but rifles are expensive, kings are cheap. Plus, a rifle at that time would take you about a minute to load and fire one shot. In that same minute, I could fire this 3 times. Rifles also did not come with bayonets. Muskets do. So now if you're going, wait a minute, well, I want a rifle with a bayonet. Well, you came to the wrong part. You should have gone to Gettysburg. I can tell you about rifled muskets there that fired fast with bayonets. So coming soon. So again, this is the workhorse of 18th century armies. The heart of the musket is the lock itself. We have a piece of stone here called flint that's going to strike a piece of steel, hopefully making a shower of sparks. Hopefully some of those sparks will fall into this little divot that's the pan where we place a bit of powder for priming, hopefully causing that to flash. Hopefully a portion of that ball of fire travels through a touch hole that leads to the main breech where the powder charge is placed, hopefully setting that off. And if all the hopefully happen, the ball rattles down the board to its intended target. So, these can misfire. Like going off half-cocked, a flash in the pan, yeah, those are all expressions that come from this weapon. And not very accurate. You could hit a man-sized target consistently up to about 60 to 80 yards. Beyond that, it is sheer luck. Now, it doesn't mean that at 200 yards you're safe. You get clocked between the eyes with a 1-ounce musket ball, your day is done. But you are the unluckiest person in the world if someone intentionally aimed at you at that distance. So we have a weapon that tends to misfire and is not very accurate. How do we compensate for that? Well, how did they do combat in the 18th century? Shoulders, run. They stand shoulder to shoulder and fire volleys at each other. It was a team effort. If most of the muskets go off, you're sending a wall of lead, a shower of lead like a big shotgun towards your enemy. So you can do that every 20 seconds. So that's how they would use these. And I know it seems kind of silly by our standards today, but they would fight in open fields because, well, to make sure you got a hit, you probably all know this one. Don't shoot till you see what?
The whites of
The
their
whites
eye.
of their eyes. Yeah, you had to get in close. And you want to get those quick volleys in to disperse your enemy. So it was like a big chessboard. You try to maneuver. The flags were important. Musicians were important. The couriers. You had to be able to see, command, and control. It's hard to do that in a dense forest. I know we often think, I would have been behind a tree with my rifle. I would have been okay. I'm an American. Well, a Hessian soldier in the next war said, I love rifle. Because they'd fire a shot at us, they'd get behind a tree, and they'd be busy messing around with their rifles, and we'd sneak up to them with our bayonets, go, yeah. Rifles are great, charging squirrels and deer, they have some combat effectiveness, but again, right here's the workhorse. So we're going to head down to the fort to talk about this further by firing it. Any questions before we leave the comfort of the shade?
Maybe that smell's starting to get to him.
Can't come close.
Yeah, you're welcome to get down to the trench lines.
I'm a little closer to the beach, so I'm going to put in some earplugs. You know, I'm a tough guy. Young and tough. Now I'm old and tough, don't have much hearing yet. So to get the soldiers acclimated to the use of a firearm, they would teach them a drill. The drill would have them bring the musket up to their left shoulder and then come to a recovered position. They would half cock the firelock, and this part of the lock is called the cock because it resembles a rooster. There you go. They then would slap the cartridge box and pull out a prepared cartridge. Just simply a rolled tube of paper twisted on both ends, pre-measured charge, with a musket ball in it. You get to it, bite it open. Prime. Shut the pan. Pass the valve. Cartridge in the barrel. Pull out the rammer. Ram it home. That's it. Not that complicated. So let's see if we can make it work. If you have sensitive area, you're welcome to cover up. Like to see that again?
Yes.
Okay, let's see if you're as smart as a Virginia soldier. You remember how it's loaded. What do I do first? Half-cock firelock.
Powder.
Your cartridge.
Well, they have a technical term. It's called get out a cartridge. Like that little thing. Light it
Light it
up.
up.
Prime the pan.
Remember, you have to do this in 20 seconds because people are shooting at you.
Load the pan.
Load the barrel.
Load the pan.
Okay, you could be on Team France because you just dumped out all your priming powder. But to close your hammer,
Close it.
which goes in first, powder or ball?
Powder.
Powder.
Pull the stick
All
back.
the rammer.
Okay.
Ram it home.
Ram it up.
Return.
Put it back.
Put it back. I might need it again. Okay.
The ground next to it.
It's going to be a test.
You know what? Maryland's looking for a good soldier. So you're good. Okay. Let's try this again. Forgot to mention, if I shoot it, you clean it. You think it's Grandma's house Thanksgiving? Wolf down the turkey and leave her with the dishes? Well, fortunately, we do have one more program, so we won't have to clean it. We do want you to remember that what you're on is a battlefield. And you're like, oh yeah, Ranger, it's pretty obvious. Good job, Captain Obvious. Well, think of other battlefields you've been to and what's missing here that you've seen in other battlefields to remind you of the cost of war. Yeah, the monuments and the
The
cemeteries.
graves.
There are 33 people who lost their lives here. And as far as we know, none of them ever received a burial. A year later, when Braddock's army came through this meadow, an officer commented that he saw human bones scattered about. In all the archaeological work we have done, we have never once uncovered human remains. We find the musket balls, the flints, the other artifacts of soldier life, but never the soldiers themselves. So out of respect for their sacrifices, I, as the site manager, make sure this place looks nice to remind us of that sacrifice. I want to thank you all for coming out today. If you have any questions for Braxton or me, give us a moment to come around the corner. We'll be glad to help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and just a short little clip here as I have just left that very interesting presentation on Fort Necessity. And just about 100 to 200 yards away is Washington's Tavern, where I'm heading up to now. And when I get up there, I'll start recording again and let you know what I see. Okay, forgive the traffic noise, but we're right up against Route 40 and there are cars traveling, but this is the outside of the tavern. And as I said, it is named Mount Washington Tavern after Mr. George Washington. However, it was built after his death. And before I go in, I noticed a wagon over here. Let me go take a quick peek at the wagon. This is the SUV of the days, ladies and gentlemen. No Wi-Fi. Very cool. This is your 18th century gas station slash restaurant slash tavern bar. Stop, take a rest your animals. Maybe, I don't know if you could pick up any supplies, but I see they have the boot scrapes for the travelers. Alright, let's go in. Okay, we are inside the Washington Tavern. All of the rooms are plexiglassed, where you can look in, but you cannot go in. And they wanted to keep it much as they would have been at the time. I see a turkey hanging on the wall. The tavern, the bottles. And for one of my prior visits, this was interesting. There are some graffiti. It might be hard because it's so dimly lit, but there's graffiti on the wall where they have written like numbers, doing bar tabs and writing names and such, and they've preserved this on the wall. Okay, here's a sitting area that would lead into the dining room, and a small desk if you want to do any correspondence to family. And I see the table is set with breakfast, which I could probably go for at least some water and some food myself. It's very hot today. It's a bit of a musty smell in here, but it is very well kept. Well, here is the kitchen. Oh, yeah, you can see. I don't know if you could see from here, but it does lead into the dining room. Okay. Well, let's take a look upstairs. Stairwells in the day were much more narrow. That is the shot of the wagon. Here is one of the bedrooms. I would assume that one family per room. The third floor is closed. I've never been up to the third floor. There's another room with some beds and a trunk, chamber pot, wash basin. Another bedroom. Oh, 3 beds in here. Must have been some larger family. There's a shot of where I just walked up. Okay, that concludes the tour of the Washington Tavern. I'm just looking in the sitting room again, and I'm gonna make the walk back to the visitor center for one final wrap up. Okay, I'm back outside the visitor center. Just finished the very interesting and it was one of the better tours. I've been here when I was a kid in junior high, and they had actually set off some cannons and things, but today's was very interesting. Got to see the muskets fire and heard some stories for some very nice and knowledgeable parks rangers. So with that, I'm gonna wrap this up with our travels to Fort Necessity and see where our next adventure takes us, what park we can hit next. And with that, I'll see you next time when we're riding into history. Thank you, and please like and subscribe.